Religions are what we call New Age religions. They started developing as Christianity started losing its hold on America, and we started as a culture expanding our industries, outsourcing things into India, the Far East, even with China. And so what that meant was the world, there's a book, if you like to read a lot, I read all kinds of stuff. It's called The World is Flat. And it's not a scientific book to say the world is flat, but what it's saying is we've come so far with technology, and the world economically and politically has shrunk because, you talk to people now in India to order a hamburger in some places in our country. I don't know if y'all knew that, but they are doing that. Let me turn this off. And that being said, that's a good book to read if you want to see what's going on. And anyway, his premise is because the world is flat, the cultures are intermixing now. Where you and I grew up, and I never met an Islamic person. I never met a Buddhist, because I taught world religions, I did. And it was on the Air Force Base. And in the Air Force Base with the military, you see all these religions, more so than you did decades ago. So that being said, America has been basically invaded by other belief systems and exposing us to that. The Beatles were very instrumental in bringing Far Eastern religions into our culture through their music. He was with Yoko Ono, or whatever her name was, Yoko, and she influenced him greatly. And then when the Beatles split, of course, John, before he died, was really working hard to take music and incorporate those concepts of Eastern mysticism, as they call it. So the New Age religions are a combination of mixing things that we believe to a certain point with their basic beliefs and intertwining them so you come up with new groups. The big word for it, and I guess it just went off. What'd y'all do, reboot it? Yeah. The big word for all of this, and I've used it before, but I'll put it back up here, is this. Syncretism. And when you sync something, that's bringing things together. The ism is a belief. So this is a bringing together of different beliefs. So they may take a little bit of Christianity, and as this guy out in the West is doing, that he's been basically kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention. He's now saying that Islam and Christianity have a lot in common. No, they don't. No, they don't. But he's actually going through the process of trying to syncretize this. The Catholic Church, though Christian, when you look at their doctrines and basic beliefs and stuff, is a culmination through centuries of study and their beliefs, and a lot of the stuff they do traditionally and stuff is nothing more than a blending of other religions. For example, the worship of Mary. All right, when the Catholic Church, and I'm talking about centuries ago, through the Roman Empire, went into new areas that were already what we call pagan. Those pagan religions usually had a male deity and a female deity, or multiple deities, or multiple gods. And the Catholic Church discovered, in the process of going into these areas, this is a long time ago, that to be more accepting to these pagan cultures, there had to be some subtle changes in the Catholic Church, and one of them was to elevate Mary to the place of almost Godhead, which she's not, but she's to be, worshipped. She can be prayed to. And they, in my opinion, deified her. And through time, of course, that developed a doctrine. And so this made it more palatable for these areas that the Catholic Church was going into. They did a lot of things, like with the bells, the steeples, all of those things are pagan symbols. They put them into the Christian faith as a means of helping people who didn't understand the Christian faith, maybe to open their minds to it. But in the process with time, as every syncretism happens, it usually takes on a nature of its own, and its doctrines and beliefs become different than what the intent was. And so today, in New Age religions, because the world has, as I said, become flat, smaller, and all these cultures are intermixing. I'm pretty sure some of you have said the word karma before. If you hear the word karma, what does it mean? If you've used it, all of you've probably used it. Huh? What goes around comes around. If you do a good deed, you should get good back. Well, karma is a pagan teaching. It comes out of Eastern mysticism. Christians don't believe that, but yet we use it. So already we've been infiltrated with what we call a syncretism word, and we use it because instead of saying what goes around comes around. But see, that's not always true. You can be good and do good deeds all the time and never have anything come back to you good. It's dependent on God, not fate, but faith in God, and He's the one who brings, and all good things come from God. So our Christian perspective is contrary to karma. But for them, it's essential, because if the karma reaches a certain point, then they can escape the wheel of life and all its suffering and move into the one. And because your deeds have, following the teachings and stuff, has gotten you there. And your ultimate goal is to go out of not non-existence, but you get into a reality where you don't know what reality is. You're absorbed into the one. That's the best way to put it. So that being said, can you put the other stuff back up just for a minute? Is that possible to do that? Then we'll come back to this. So syncretism is all these New Age religions that you see. Mormonism came around 1840s. Jehovah's Witnesses was somewhere around 1870, 1890, after Civil War. Some of the Scientology was a later development, probably, I want to say 1940s. I'll have to go back and look when we get to it. But they're popping up everywhere. And we're moving into a time now where the younger generations are using the term, and I just put it in acronym, SBNR, spiritual but not religious. And so what they do is they take Christianity, but they don't take the practice of the faith. So you wouldn't see them observing the Lord's Supper. You wouldn't see them going through baptism. You wouldn't see them aligning with a church or any particular denomination. They just say they believe in God, and they have a awareness of God. But many of those, what they do is SBNR, spiritual but not religious. What they're heavy on is the environment, that you need to take care of the earth. And that's where a lot of these are coming from. With the EPA and the environmental consciousness that came out of the 60s and 70s, there again, Far Eastern religions, there became an awareness that we need to do more to take care of our earth. Because these ancient religions over there started with the concept that earth is a female, because she gives birth to things. And the name that is often associated with it, and you'll see this popping up, is this. And if you go way back before Christianity, Judaism, go back to before there was really any organized religions, after the fall of man, and then of course Cain and all them, left to themselves, they started worshiping the creation rather than the creator. Paul says that in Romans. So that means that nature itself and the universe has to be worshipped, because that's what's controlling your destiny, and that's not what the Bible teaches. The creation declares the glory of God, but God's not in the creation. It's not something to be worshipped. It's something to recognize who God is, and so you worship Him. And Paul discusses this in Romans 1. And so what happened with these earlier religions, Mother Earth was worshipped, and that's why you hear the weatherman today say Mother Nature. It's an old hand-me-down, that Mother Nature's weather comes from these concepts. So these New Age religions are indoctrinating the concept that we've got to take care of Mother Earth or we won't have a planet. And so they take the science that we have, that man has accumulated, and they have distorted it to try to fit their mode that we need to take care of Earth. And it's a religious thing, it's a spiritual thing. And many of these people popped up in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and their concept was the Earth is overpopulated, so it needs to be depopulated. And so, Hitler was one who decided Jews don't need to be here. African Americans don't need to be here. People who've got deformities don't need to be here. So he came up with a list, and actually that was part of his agenda. A lot of people that was with him. There's a book called The Twisted Cross by Joseph Carr, and he explains how Hitler basically created a religion to annihilate humanity and create a superhuman race, And anyway, and it's mixed up with all kinds of other religions. But many of these religions, their whole concept is to depopulate the earth, that we're the problem, and that you need to protect all the animals, all the species. And if we could get our population level low enough and get rid of the people that, don't see the way they do, Christians, then we can save the earth. And so the climate change is what's interesting, because these people have been instrumental in getting behind the climate change with Gore and all these people. And we call them tree huggers, Greenpeace and other, and they're radical. They're radical. They'll burn things up and blow up things up to get their points across. And they have been growing, and they have been increasing more and more lobbyists in Congress to push these agendas through. And so this one world government that's forming very rapidly has come up with what they call Agenda 21, and now it's called Agenda 30 or 31. They've stepped it up. And they have a whole plan of how to protect the earth. And it's basically to take over people's lands and tell them how they can use it and how they can't use it. I don't know if the sign is still up, but in the Smoky Mountains, when you go into the Smokies, there's a sign there that says it's an international biosphere. It used to be there a few years ago when I was there. And when I saw it, I said, what? International biosphere? What's that? Well, go look it up. And they have designated certain parts of the world as areas that this world climate group is going to protect. And they're going to limit what you can do. And I actually talked with someone in the Low Country who had land adjacent to the Cherokee reservation, and they were going to build houses up there and, resort homes and stuff. And he told me they finally had to just sell the land because the international biosphere reached out past the reservation itself and controls most of the Smokies and limits what you can do. Even if you're downstream and the water coming downstream to you, what you can do there. So this is something that's happening, while we go to bed at night and get up, that you never hear about on the news unless you do your research. And I fell into it, like I said, reading other books. I have researched the climate change intently, and I'm telling you, the science is not there. Because, they tell you that science, you have to bring your theories into the scientific laboratory, and you have known standards that have been proven to be science. And the theory that you have has to be tested against the knowns, and you have to get the same results every time. Otherwise, it's a theory. It's not real. That's why evolution is a theory. It can't be proven scientifically. Theoretically, it looks like it's there, but we have no observable data. People say, well, it happened over 1 billion years. Well, you weren't there, dude. Science says you have to observe it. It has to be, it has to be. So that throws it out. It's a theory. Wild theory at that. The same thing goes with climate change. But what we do have, and you can get you some books, and they're all out there now because they got both sides. But what we do have is scientific data that tracks the temperature of the earth, and it goes all the way back into the 1300s. And you see things like this, okay? Kind of up and down periods. Sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's hot. For example, in the 1300s, and this is about New Age religions because this is where they're getting it from. In the 1300s, for about, I think it's somewhere around 1200 to about 1600, the earth was the warmest it's ever been, according to the core samples. The ice samples they've drilled down and found that they can measure that in trees and all this other stuff, and actually down in the earth. Anyway, the core samples have shown that the earth was warmer than in any other time, which means, what? You're going to have more green things growing. If you have more green things growing, they have to have CO2 to survive. So if your footprint of CO2 is high, then they're feeding off of that, and that's why you got more trees. Greenland's called Greenland because at one time it was green. It wasn't ice. People inhabited it centuries ago. That's why it was called green. You ever wondered about that? Because now it's mostly ice, and And so that being said, we've got scientific evidence that shows the earth goes through cycles. Now, climate change is the word they use now. In the 70s, when Gail and I got married, we were married in 72, and in 73, on February the 9th, it started snowing. It's on a Friday, and I was at work, and they let us off from work early down at Valchem. And by the time I got home, we'd already had 3 or 4 inches on the ground. And when we got up the next morning, it was 14 or 15 in some places. And, I mean, the dog, my brother-in-law's dog, he was a German Shepherd, and you could see his tail as he went through the snow, because he was, it was cold. Newspapers were full. The earth is getting colder. The earth is going to freeze. In 20 years will be an ice age. Yeah. The frozen planet, and it was everywhere. Okay, well, when we get to the end of, I think it was about the 80s or somewhere along there, we started going the other way. About the time Al Gore and his little cronies come on the scene. So now they switched and said the earth was, the ice caps are going to melt. And because of that, the oceans are going to rise. Well, take a little experiment, go home, fill a glass up with ice. Okay, and then the rest of it with water and get it right to the top. I promise you, when that ice melts, the water will not come out of the glass. It's called displacement. Our oceans rising have more to do with tidal changes and magnetic fields and things like that, more so than ice caps melting. And the ice caps are actually getting bigger again. And that's scientific proof. They won't tell you that, but if you read between the lines, get your own information, which I search. And so here's the thing, going back to this. Oh, one other little fact that's interesting. The song "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas," the guy who wrote it, read the story how he came up with it. It was post-Civil War. During the American Revolution, a little before the American Revolution, all the way up through the Civil War, we were in a cold spell. It was snowing as far south as Charleston. I mean, we had terrible winters. People were just, the winter had shifted way down. No one was talking about climate change or the earth getting colder or nothing. They accepted that's the way the weather was. So during the Civil War, if there was any fighting going on, they couldn't fight in the winter because it was so bad. Well, all of a sudden, after the Civil War, weather began to change. And the guy who wrote the song made notes that no longer did they have white Christmases like they did when he was a kid. He had seen a change. And so he wrote this very melancholy song, "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas," just like the one I used to know. And it had to do with the weather change. So we got a good song out of weather change. But climate change is a political agenda to tax countries like America, not China, which should be, but they're not going to tax them, but other industrialized countries, to shift the wealth from one country to another. That's it. Because if they tax us, we'll pay the tax because we got more carbon footprint, more CO2, we got more cars and all this stuff. But one volcano blowing up and running for just a few days puts more of that in the air than we put in the air for 50 years. That's a fact. So that is more responsible for the carbon footprint. And back during those 300 or 400 years when I told you it was so warm, there were several active volcanoes going on, so that the sun was filtered, it cooled down, but then it heated back up when all that dissipated. But it was during that time. And another thing happens when you got more food on the earth, more people eat, populations grow. Populations in Europe and Asia just ballooned during that time. Then they got the plague and it went the other way. So history, though some people hate it and it's boring, has been one of my favorite subjects. And as a communicator of the gospel, one of the things pastors should do is be like a watchman on the wall. If you see things coming that's going to harm the people that Satan and his clan is trying to do, you're to warn the people. Then they have to decide what they're going to do about it. But a watchman who remains silent and says nothing will be held accountable to God. So I've made it part of my ministry for 40 plus years to be not the watchman, but a watchman, to keep in touch with what's going on around us. And I've made predictions that came true, not because I'm a prophet, but because, it's called discernment. You can see the times. In 98, I gave a speech to a group of people in my church. It was some kind of organization. And that's when the homosexual thing was getting big. And I made this statement. I said, the homosexual agenda has nothing to do about their rights. That's a sexual preference. So there's nothing in the Constitution protecting sexual preferences. And I said, what they're doing, and I said, it's going to happen. They're creating a problem for the church, because by giving them so-called protective rights, that you can't say anything, you can't do anything, you can't, discriminate, you got to hire them or whatever. If the church speaks up and says, well, the Bible says this is sin, and this is a sinful matter, and this needs to be dealt with spiritually and not politically. If the church says that, then they'll attack the church and find a way to persecute the church and put us, as I said, you ever heard somebody paint yourself into a corner, And I said, they're trying to paint us into a corner. And I said, they're going to call us bigots. They're going to turn against us. They're going to have hate. And I said, these people who are these one-worlders, the church is standing in the way of what they're trying to do. And that's the reason why they're using the homosexuals. Hitler used homosexuals. He didn't like them, didn't want them, but in the beginning he protected them because it was an offense to the church. And then he turned on them. And, it's been done before. History repeats itself all the time. So getting back to the alternative religions, you got all these things going on. And Satan is at work to create confusion. He's at work to distort the truth if he can. And this climate change is a political agenda to basically change the wealth of the world and to shift wealth. And but behind it is these religious zealots who see this as man's problem, that we've done this to ourselves. In fact, if you read Al Gore's book, which I did, and I didn't want to, but I did, he's got a chart in there that goes like this. And then when it gets to about, the 1990s or 2000, it spikes up. And he said the Earth was kind of just cycling along, and all of a sudden we had this, what they call hockey stick. It jacked up, and gained about 1.5 degrees. And he calls it the hockey stick. Well, a guy went back and showed he was a nut, and he was wrong, went back in science. And we've had several little hockey sticks. We've even had some of the hockey sticks that went this way. And he just took an average, and then he threw this one in at the end. Instead of averaging it in, he just stuck it in there. That's what you call pseudoscience. It's false science to prove your point. And it's all about money. It's all about power. If they were really concerned about the earth, they'd give up their jets, their cars. They would make the sacrifice. They don't. They're the elitists that want to control us. And, and then, now as far as a Christian in the environment, I've done some messages before on that. We have a responsibility. Adam and Eve took care of the garden, took care of the animals. They had responsibility. He worked. And they had things they had to do. So we don't become wasteful. We try to take care of everything. We're responsible. This is the earth God gave us. But I'm going to tell you this. There's almost 8 billion people on the earth, and there's still a lot of vacant land. And there's a lot of land that's not growing any food that could be growing food. And there's a lot of wicked rulers out there that are hoarding food and not feeding people. And when I hear people say, we're going to run out of water, and we're going to run out of this, the science is there to take the ocean and make good water out of it already. And they're doing that in places in Africa and some other places in the desert areas. So all I'm saying to you is information is important. These false religions are undergirding this, okay? And the Greenpeace and all them, they're tree huggers. They want a Mother Earth that we take care of, and she takes care of us. If you saw the movie Avatar, I don't know if y'all saw that, and the second one, so y'all not into science fiction, that is a promotional film for the environment. And the people in there, because the planet has gotten so bad, everything's CO2 now, no oxygen, these people are blue. If you got low amounts of oxygen, you don't look like we do, you turn blue. So in the movie, there's a whole generation of these people.
Did you see that?
Yes, I saw it. And the reason I saw it is because it had a message. And somebody's going to ask me one day, a young person going to ask me, preacher, what do you think about Avatar? I got an answer for them. I read books that most people don't read. I want to answer. I'm reading a book now, The Return of the Gods by Jonathan Cahn. And he's talking about how Baal and all the false gods of the Old Testament are back in a different form, but with the same agenda. And he's opening my eyes to some things I didn't see. So yes, I saw that one. Star Wars. Star Wars, from the beginning, was an attempt to put into our culture the New Age philosophies. May the force be with you, darkness and light. And it's like the stories about the witches. What is it? The lady that wrote all them books. Harry Potter. That's witchcraft. It's witchcraft. And the book I'm reading now by Jonathan Cahn, this is what he says. When Christianity loses its appeal, when it loses its influence, when the government says you can't teach it to your children like you used to, then there's something going to fill the void. There's something that's going to take its place. And what's taking its place is these New Age religions, alternative religions, and they're growing very rapidly. And it's almost like we've been demonized overnight. And you wonder what's wrong with your country. It's a spiritual battle against darkness. And the only answer, we, as one little church, you think we don't have much power, but God is in us. That's and the reputation of disciples were, these are the men that turned the world upside down. Within 300 years, the Roman Empire was crushed and all the gods went away. So if we just get our churches back on target, winning the lost, training ourselves, equipping ourselves, being vigilant, living for God, you're like a light shining in the community, and demons can't hang around because they don't mix with light. Darkness and light don't mix. Light always overcomes darkness. I proved that when we had her mother and father's 50th anniversary in the mountains. They stuck us in the bottom of this chalet that I paid for, me and my brother-in-law. And we got stuck in the bottom so everybody could have the bigger beds and the babies and stuff. But anyway, they put us in a room. Gail was already in there. She shut the door. You couldn't see anything. I opened up the door, and I shut the door. I said, Gail, how did you get in the bed? Because we didn't even have a light in there. And she said, I just walked over to the bed and got in. And she said, I kind of found my way, and I couldn't find my way. And then it dawned on me, that's total darkness. But we was able to get a light on, and guess what? Pushes the darkness away. Same thing here. That's why it's so important. When Christians say they don't want to go to church, all they're voting is for darkness to take over. They're voting for another religion to take the place. And in the minds of our children, they can't read the Bible, they can't pray in school, but they can read Harry Potter. Harry Potter is nothing more than witchcraft put into children's stories to give you the idea that you have power to put spells on people. You know, white magic is supposed to be good magic, but it's still supposedly a psychological spell that you've got in your head. Black magic is putting an evil spell on somebody. And so, I preached against all that stuff. And, I had, my wife's in the library, they had to read the books, or at least they were made available. But my point is that we are at a turning point, have been for decades now, since the 60s, where these alternative religions are growing like weeds. And you know how weeds grow, you can't get rid of them. I don't care how you treat them, they keep coming back, okay? Paganism, earlier nature-based, and there's a Wicca, Druidism. And the Druids were primarily in Ireland, England, Scotland, and they were a form of witchcraft. Things like that. Let's see. Hope I didn't turn. Did it freeze on me? I think it froze on me, did it? Go to the next slide. There it is. There's Yoruba religions, there's 3 types, Santera, Voodoo, Candomblé. Those came out of Africa. When they got to the Caribbean, when the slaves came across, and the sugar plantations originally brought them over, they mixed with the Indians that were present and some of their beliefs and some of the African beliefs. And voodoo, I think y'all familiar with the voodoo dolls, you can stick them, same thing. That came out of that, and those religions were non-Christian, so they had a lot of stuff in it. Theosophy, divine wisdom. All reality is basically spiritual in nature. Visible matter is condensed spirit. Levitation, meditation, trances, clairvoyance, all that came out of Eastern mysticism. That's come into our culture. You have people that, Christians who are doing yoga and meditating, and, some are claiming to be able to channel the dead and things like that. Well, I got news for you. They try to channel me back, I ain't coming. I ain't talking to nobody, I'm in heaven. You know what I'm saying? So I froze again. Wonder why it's freezing. Am I doing something wrong? Just go to the next slide. There you go. Scientology, Ron Hubbard. And we'll come back to these. I'm going to show you some videos. He believes that you can become a thetan. A thetan is a spiritual reality within longs for liberation, which longs for liberation. An operating thetan is the highest order. Tom Cruise is a thetan. He'll tell you that. Several of his marriages didn't last because he sees himself as essentially sent to this world with higher knowledge than any of us. And he sees himself as, it's an egotistical religion, by the way. And Ron Hubbard was a sick man. And but they mix in science with their beliefs. If you're a science-oriented type person, it would be easy to be sucked into it. But he sees himself as an actual thetan, and we'll come into that later in more detail. And then, of course, Mormonism, I thought we'd start with tonight, and Jehovah's Witnesses. These are some of the modern challenges that every religion faces, but talking about us as Christians. Science and technology. People try to say that the Bible and science are not compatible. I say the Bible just shows that science is just, revealing what God's already done, in my opinion. And I've studied the nuclear side of it. I've studied the other side of it, the physics and stuff, and even the quantum physics. I've read books on that. And I'm telling you, the God we serve is an awesome God. And he created all this stuff. All they're doing is discovering what he already put in place. And he did that simply from speaking. Science and ethics, that's a biggie right now. We've got major issues as a church, what to deal with, what's fixing to happen. Because of science, artificial intelligence has created computers and things that are going to have personality, that are going to be able to think, reason, and you wouldn't know that it was a human if you was talking to it. It's the way it's moving. That being said, the ethics of that would be, how does this impact us? What's right and wrong about artificial intelligence? Because there's never been a moral code set up for something that acts like us and looks like us and talks like us and performs like us. And then you got the cloning situation, which they're just itching to clone human beings, which supposedly that might be being done as I speak. But there's a clone which comes from you and it's a footprint of you. People are saying clone the clone so you can get body parts so you can live longer. And since it's a clone, it's not technically, it's you. So you're using yourself that's being discussed. And you say they wouldn't do that. We'll talk to people in China how they're taking prisoners and taking their parts out of them and selling them on the market. Humanity will invent ways of doing evil. So we got some serious challenges coming in the days ahead because of science. It's created situations. All right, just for the example, if you're in a intensive care and they've got you on life support, that was something that decades ago was not possible. Now it's an everyday thought, so you have to sign a living will, a DNR, do not resuscitate. And you can speculate. They ask you when you go to the doctor now, do you have a living will and all this stuff? Well, it sounds good, but if you're the one who decides to do all of this, but then if nothing else can be done in my life, well, you're going to run across people like I have in the ministry who somebody's on life support. She had open heart surgery. They had a little pump in there pumping her heart because the heart was too weak after the surgery to work. And I was on vacation, went back home because I was called in. The family, she was dying, sweet lady. And all the family had come in from Michigan. There's about 10 of them in there. And they'd gotten in a fight with the doctor because he said she's dead. She is technically dead. The only thing we're doing is keeping her on life support. We're even pumping her heart. And he says, I'm telling y'all, we turn it off, she's gone. Said her brain activity is basically nominal. And so when I got there, he was livid. He said, are you the minister? I said, yeah. Well, I need your blankety blank help. I said, well, that's not the way to start. He said, well, these fools out here won't listen to me. And he was upset. He said, the woman is dead. And he walked over there and he waited about 3 seconds. He said, did you see that? I said, look, you don't have to do that anymore. He said, well, I'm telling you, we have reached a point And he said, seeing at that time the directives for life and stuff they were just getting written by the hospitals and the insurance and Medicare. And I said, look, I'll take care of it. I went out there and I said, look, guys, I didn't know but one of them. And he was the only sober one there. That was the problem. They was all liquored up. And I said to him, I said, look, I said, your mother is already with the Lord. I said, they have the ability now to give you the appearance that, and I said, until you can come to the recognition of that so you can do what needs to be done. And I said, knowing your mom, I said, like I did, I said, this is not what she would have wanted. And y'all's behavior is really, really creating problems for the doctor and the hospital. And I said, let's just thank God for her life and let's let God have her. And the other ones were a little looking at me, you know, and they were saying, so you say my mom was dead? I said, technically, no, from the machines, no, but from her standpoint as a human being, yes, her life is ended. And so I got them to agree, and they went there and said their goodbyes. And, you know, the doctor thanked me, and I think it was about 6 months later, he dropped dead of a heart attack. So, you know, they didn't put him on life support. But my point is, you know, in ministry, I've learned, being in those critical situations, things have changed, and it's very difficult because a lot of people feel guilty about turning machines off and things like that. But, you know, when there were no machines and when there was no extension of life, you died at home in a farmhouse or whatever, and, you know, that was it. And so I'm just saying we got ethical issues to decide. Human sexuality reassessment, that was written 20 years ago. You know what they were talking about then? Transgender. You know, can you take a boy and turn him into a girl and turn a girl into a boy? That's a big ethical thing. You know, and if we give in to that, then we're surrendering our next generation of children that God didn't know what he was doing, and it's a lie. See? And the only ethical police, if you want to use that term, strong term, on this earth right now is the Church of Jesus Christ and every born-again believer. So you can't put your head in the sand, so that just don't affect me. Oh, it will affect you. It'll come home. There's been many a parent who said, well, they're homosexual, my kids will never do that. And all of a sudden they come back from college, I want you to meet my boyfriend, we're getting married. And they said they never dreamed that would happen. And it's because they've been indoctrinated. Women's rights movements have basically improved some things, but it's made things worse. Men now are considered worthless. Men do not have the place in society that they used to. And they've basically, you know, taken men and turned them into insignificant beings, that we don't need men anymore and stuff like that. Well, God said we did. So women's rights is good to improve conditions for women in the world, but they've gone too far. Secularism, which is the rejection of the gospel and Christianity and strictly humanism. Environmental changes, eclectic religion, pick and choose from each religion, which goes back to this. This is becoming a big thing. So people that want to get along with people say, well, I'm Christian, but then when you hear what they believe. And Paul said this, if any man come to you preaching another Jesus than I preached, what did he say to the people? Let him be cursed. Let him be under the curse of God. So if you hear coming out of my mouth the Jesus that's not defined in the Bible of who he is, you need to get rid of me. Any preacher. He is Lord. He's God. He's the Savior of this world. You know, he's the author and finisher of our faith. I mean, I could go on and on. And so you need to know your Bibles. You need to not only know them, you need to believe it to the point that you're willing to defend it. Because we're moved into an age where most people do not know. And there's preachers out there who are changing and twisting the gospel to fit what the people want. And it's there. It's there. Me and Steve talk about it all the time. All right. Now, start the Mormonism tape. And I think, Laurel, that it's Jeremiah at the beginning does some commercials about his other videos. We've got just a few minutes. I'm going to kind of whet your appetite and we'll finish it next week. Go ahead and start it. The video, let's see. We're going to look at Jehovah's Witness. We'll look at Scientology. We'll discuss these things. And you say, well, we don't need to know what they believe. They knock on your door. Do they come around here much? Y'all run them off. They what?
Through its high standards of excellence, Jeremiah
Not since COVID. I figured they'd come around with their mask on.
and distribution of intelligent, innovative, and thought-provoking videos, books, and
You're just fast forwarding it? Is the sound on?
with its in-depth analysis of ancient and modern world religions, Jeremiah Films is at the forefront of providing
You can't get the sound on?
insight into a myriad of ever-expanding new religious theories.
By the way, Dr. David Jeremiah has on his website, has all these videos. That's what I got this from. This one's on YouTube. And his people do a very good job of presenting the facts. So if you know, A Woman Rides the Beast, I read that book. That's a good book. But it talks about the Catholic Church and their involvement in the end times and stuff. It's pretty informative. Do y'all see when the sound is not working? Ken, you want to go out there and look at it and see if you can see why the sound's not working? Yeah.
Visit our website at www.jeremiahfilms.com.
Yeah. Well, you're an IT guy. You might look at it and say, oh, I put you on the spot. Yeah, not that Ken. Yeah. All right, that's where we want to start right there, Laurel, whenever we get ready. Yeah, pause it. That's where we want to start because it's talking about the Mormon Tabernacle in Utah. While they're doing that, Joseph Smith originated in Upper New York. Is where he lived. And several things happened in that area in the 1840s. One of the biggest things, 1844 was the second Jubilee of the Jews, which meant it was their second millennium. And a lot of people felt that Messiah would come. The Jews thought their Messiah was coming. Christians thought Jesus was coming back. And America had been infiltrated with a lot of immigrants out of Europe, out of Ireland, other places in Europe. There had been some wars. And so America was kind of a mixed bag of a lot of people that were not assimilated into our Christian, faith. In Upper New York, for some strange phenomenon, there were a lot of groups breaking out with these beliefs and forming splinter groups off the church. And Joseph Smith was one of these dudes. He claimed that he received some gold tablets, and those gold tablets were given by Moroni, the prophet or whatever. And on those gold tablets was the Book of Mormon, which he translated into English for people to read. He's the only one that ever saw the tablets. He's the only one who interpreted the tablets. And so nobody knows, where he got his information from. Just to give you an idea, one of the twisted things he believed was that when the 10 lost tribes of Israel were destroyed by the Assyrians, that Jesus Christ appeared to them in Israel, got them on boats, and led them across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean, and that's where the Indians came from. They were actually the lost tribes of Israel. You with me? He is what today modern society would call a true racist. He only believed that, and you'll see this in the video because it comes out, they don't want you to know this, but I'm going to tell you this. So he believed that the only race that God would ever spare would be white, period. No Indians, no African Americans, no Chinese, So that to me marks him as a heretic, but anyway. That's one of the beliefs he believed. The other thing he brought into the religion, and his own people didn't like it, but he said because he was the prophet, he had the right to have sexual relationships with any woman within the church that he wanted to, which caused the elders that he formed to really, turn against him. But that was one of his beliefs, and he continued to do that, and his wife continued to stay with him. Eventually, it cost him his life. They say that the people that was against the Mormons, because they run him out of New York, and then they went out toward the west, and then Missouri, and then they finally ended up in Utah. But he was killed while living in Missouri, and most people believe he was killed by some of his own people because they'd had enough of his shenanigans because of that doctrine. But it's funny because Brigham Young, who came behind him, did the same thing and had like 20-something wives. And I just got through reading a book called The 19th Wife of Brigham Young. And so every time I see Brigham Young University, I'm sorry, I have bad feelings. I know they're a university and stuff, but I know too much about the Mormons to know that, it's not Christian. It never will be Christian. Now, as they developed in time, they found that they had so much resistance. That's why they ended up in Utah. It was a territory. And they were able to get in there and get the land kind of like squatters. And then they appealed to Congress and eventually got, territory rights and eventually got statehood. And they persecuted a lot of people, killed a lot of people. And when they killed a lot of people, they would make it look like Indian raids. So the people thought the Indians were doing it. So they'd turn against the Indians. And so they're very conniving, very judgmental. The multiple wife thing was not practiced by all Mormons, but it was practiced by many of them, particularly the leadership. And that being said, there was division among the Mormons because of that doctrine and teaching. Eventually they dropped that, but there are still people who are Mormons have multiple wives, but they're off the radar because, legally that's not supposed to be. Polygamy is not something that's supposed to be practiced. Most states have laws against it. There's no federal law, but most states have state laws against that. So that's some of the stuff that's there. Brigham Young was very wealthy. He milked the people. They had to pay tithes and stuff, and he would claim he was building a big tabernacle, which he didn't build in his time. They built it later. But he would milk the people and tell them if they didn't give, then God would be against them and all this stuff. Some of the twisted beliefs, they have to wear celestial underwear, and which means you have a spouse, and she's going to be your spouse forever. And your destiny is to go through the Mormon rituals and stuff. And by doing so, when you leave this earth, you'll obtain a planet. There's many planets, they said. You'll get your own planet, and you and your wife will live on that planet, and you'll be like Adam and Eve. You'll be like gods. That's why they call it the God makers. You'll reach Godhead, just like Jesus did. Jesus, they said, started as a spirit baby. Satan started as a spirit baby. Then they got bodies. And then they reached the point of Godhead. And then, of course, Satan and Jesus were brothers. This is what they teach. And, he had to get rid of his brother and fight his brother. And his brother took the kingdom against him. And they've been fighting against each other ever since. The thing about Joseph and Mary was that I think it was Moroni, came to Bethlehem, impregnated Mary. So Jesus was the spirit baby she had. And then Jesus grew to become
Looks beautiful from the outside.
Sounds like we got it. Got it? All right, go back to that point where we said to start. We got a few minutes. But I'm not telling you the rest of the story. This is complex. But when you see this, it's going forever. And these people who...
Many challenges.
That's all. So... Is the picture up? Now we can't get the picture.
Challenges facing our world. For a complete list of products, including...
Okay, he's getting to where we are. Last statistic I heard, 200-something Baptists a day are moving over to Mormonism. Because when they come to you with Jesus Christ and the cross. They come to you with the resurrection. But when you get into it, it's a deception.
new releases. Visit our website at www.jeremiahfilms.com or write us at P.O. Box 1710, Hemet, California, 92546. To place an order, you can email us or call toll-free 1-800-828-2290.
Beautiful from the outside, but when you peel off the mask and talk to the victims, you uncover another part of the story. The documented evidence you're about to see may seem unbelievable, but it's all true.
When they took my family, there wasn't anything else to live for. I tried to kill myself. Thank God I didn't succeed.
I think the most difficult part of this for me is that they have turned my own beautiful children against me. You know, the brainwashing techniques of this organization are really incredibly effective.
On behalf of a growing number of victims, Ed Decker, together with Dick Bear, themselves victims of this powerful organization, consulted with a Los Angeles-based law firm about filing a class action lawsuit.
Mr. Bear, Mr. Decker, just what are we dealing with here?
We're dealing with a massive organization, a multi-billion-dollar corporation whose wealth is worldwide and whose influence is staggering. I've got records of many, many homes that have been shattered by these people. I consider it to be one of the most deceptive and most dangerous groups in the entire world. I have documentation that ties it into the occult, into Satanism.
Mr. Decker, I don't doubt your sincerity, but I find this very hard to believe. I mean,